Welcome to Mentally Fit, the show where we delve into the human experience, sharing stories of triumph and personal growth. I'm your host, Bongiwe Dumezweni-Ntakumba, and today we have a deeply insightful and meaningful episode in store for you. In this episode, we're joined by a remarkable individual who's bravely stepping into the spotlight to share his journey through the shadows of depression. Depression, a silent struggle that touches countless lives, often goes unseen behind closed doors. But today, our guest is here to break down those barriers and shed light on his personal experience. Our guest will take us on a journey through the highs and lows of his battle with depression. He'll recount the moments of despair and uncertainty, as well as the inspiring moments of hope and recovery. By sharing his story, he's not only offering us a window into his world, but also extending a hand of understanding and empathy to those who may be walking a similar path. In a society that's increasingly recognizing the importance of mental health, our guest's journey serves as a beacon of hope. His story reminds us that there's strength in vulnerability, healing in community, and hope even in the darkest moments. Whether you faced your own battles with depression or are seeking insights to support someone you care about, this episode promises to offer a wealth of perspective and wisdom. So, without further ado, join me in welcoming our guest as he shares his story of dealing with depression on Mentally Fit. Can you start by briefly introducing yourself and sharing a little about your background? And welcome to Mentally Fit.
Thank you for welcoming me, Mrs Bongi. I want to greet the listeners from wherever that they're listening. This is your brother in the faith, Loyiso Tembisa. Eastern Cape born, Gauteng based. They call me the dreamer because I'm someone who is always having new ideas in mind, always new goals to chase, new aspirations to pursue. I'm just someone who was raised by a single mother who tried closing up the gap, but of course, as a boy child, there will always be that gap. I'm a pastor, a worship leader, an author, and a podcaster, but those are just functions that I do, but they are not who I am. But who I am is basically I'm the child of God, married with 3 children. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Welcome, Loisa, and thank you for making the time to be with us. We really appreciate you coming through.
It is my
Now,
pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
yes. Now, depression is a complex and personal experience. Could you walk us through when you first realized that you were dealing with depression?
All right, sis. I must say that depression is one of those things that you cannot fully comprehend until you are having a first-hand experience of it. It's easy to talk theory and want to be relevant when people are discussing this, but the real experience is mostly attained when you go through your own encounter of depression. Having said that, I actually have had different episodes and seasons of life where you just have stress, you would have anxiety, worry, concern, and all of those abnormal feelings of desperation, pain, disappointment, and all. I've had all of those things, but there is no single moment in life where I could say that I could attach all of those to depression. It is only this one particular dark season in my life, must have been between 2012 and 2016. My depression was triggered by events. Some people's depressions could be medical. You don't need a reason for it to happen. It just happens due to chemical imbalances and all the medical terms that they explain. But mine was mostly influenced and triggered by traumatic events, which I was going through at the time, starting a new ministry, the stress of losing a child, like miscarriage, which I went through, And there was also a season of my wife going through postnatal depression after the birth of one of our children. That is also coupled with one of the children being in and out of hospital, losing businesses, losing ministry, losing a lot of things all at the same time. And you feel helpless. You see your family going through turbulent moments and you cannot do anything. I think what exacerbated my situation more than what I was going through, it was mostly the association that I was having at the time. I was honestly surrounded by people who were negative. You could say prophets of doom, doomsayers who would just make things worse. I would even get literally death prophecies. People would say, you have a spirit of death. I see a coffin around you. You need deliverance. You are cursed. And all those negative things, which I believe they made things worse for me. So that's basically how my depression came about. That's when I first realized that I have depression, because I would have some negative thoughts of hopelessness, and I would feel empty. I would feel worthless. I would feel lonely. I'm someone who's an introvert. However, during that moment, I disconnected all my social media apps. I was just living as a loner and just nursing my wounds. It was a very traumatic experience for me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I mean, what you are pointing out to is it's a series of events that happened in your life almost all at the same time. And on top of that, you found yourself in this community of people who were really negative and further draining you instead of lifting you and encouraging you during that difficult moment. So for someone who is listening, I want you to just pay attention to those two things that Loiso is talking about. One, the experiences, the stressful experiences coming all at once at you, but also paying attention to who is around you during those difficult moments. What kind of voice is whispering in your ear, both internal voice, but also, most importantly, the external voices around you. Now, tied to what you've just said, Lois, part of what
Yes.
depression does, there is a stigma surrounding it and misunderstanding. So, how did you then approach talking about your struggles with friends and family? Or were there people that you could, at the time, share your struggles with, and how did you navigate that?
I think depression on its own is one of those taboo topics that so-called no-go areas. But I think it makes things worse now when you are a male who is accustomed to dealing with issues by internalizing them, not sharing them, not showing your vulnerability and weakness. So I actually had double trouble, if you could say. I had the challenge of dealing with the actual depression stigma, another challenge, which was a gender stereotype, which was also a very serious predicament that I was faced with. But nonetheless, I had to find a positive voice of reason. I had to go to someone who's a psychologist and a pastor. We had to have a one-on-one with a person, and that's where I was able to be vulnerable. The thing is, I was a leader, role model. People were sucking from me spiritually, mentally, and otherwise. So I had to move away from the position of feeding people and releasing to going through to a position of receiving, because I realized that I was drained and I was actually not a good assistance, and I was not adding any value to anyone. So I had to take a break from everything that gave me an opportunity or an obligation to speak to the people, to counsel the people, to motivate them, to preach to them, and to give unto them. So I had to be on the receiving end, and I allowed the man of God to speak words of healing upon my life. And he dealt with me emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. And that's the man that I was able to offload to, and he did spiritual, emotional, and psychological intervention. So that's basically what I did. I had to take myself off from the situation and, yes, go to someone who was higher than me and leave the veil level.
Yes, I'm so happy to hear that, because what you are saying to us is for people who are givers, who are always on the giving side, leading in
Yes,
the front, supporting others. Sometimes it's difficult
yes,
to say, now I want to receive support. Now I want someone to listen to me. Now I want to
yes,
just be on the receiving side. And how grateful I am that you could find someone who could not only lead you in terms of your spiritual needs, but also someone who was also a therapist who could actually take you through the process of
yes.
healing. Mm. Um,
Yeah, indeed.
yeah.
Yes, indeed. You see, with people like me and you and maybe others who are in the leadership role of leading people through opinions, ideas, and whatever initiatives we do, it's difficult for us to be vulnerable to the very people that we lead. And in fact, people think that we are always the supermen, superwomen kind of people, so much that they even create an environment which is not conducive for you to be vulnerable. I guess the superstar mentality is what works against us. Hence, even when you want to be vulnerable, you feel that the environment is not conducive for you to break down before your people, to be vulnerable, to share your weaknesses, to share your fears, and all of that.
Mm. I like what you're saying
Yes,
about being a superman or superwoman, because somehow people in leadership, we put them on a pedestal and
yes,
kind of make it in our minds that they have it all together. They are not human. They don't have human needs. They don't have human struggles. And when they do go through difficult moments, it's almost like the environment is such that you can't. You've been the one telling us to be strong. You can't be weak. You've been the
yes,
one who is
yes.
telling us to be motivated. You can't say you are demotivated. So unfortunately, we kind of infringe on that space and take away your humanity and put you on that pedestal, which I think it's really not fair.
Definitely not fair. But I guess
Mm,
it's a human nature. It's how people behave. However, it's important that as a leader and mentor, you must also have your own leader and mentor, so that while you lead others below you, you are also having someone above you. So I
mm-hmm.
guess it helps to have something like that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Now, depression can impact various aspects of life. How did it affect your work and daily activities during that period?
Firstly, it affects literally everything, to be honest. Your daily activities, the joy that you even find on simple things like your normal hobbies and things that usually give you joy, they start, you just have a sour taste on literally anything. The things that usually keep your spirit bubbly, you don't find joy in those things. You start losing appetite. Even waking up, it's such a mission when you are going through a depressed state. Even association with people, you wish you can just be left alone because you don't even want to talk. And with us who are social, I mean, we are socialites and intro and extroverts, it's even worse for us because people are accustomed to the bubbly side of us. So once you start showing signs of being withheld and stuff, they look at you in some ways. It also affected my appetite, honestly. I'm someone who is, I know that I'm not someone who is huge in terms of weight. However, during that time, I was excessively thin. I was not eating. It was a combination of fasting, diet, hunger strike, and whatever else you can associate with one who is deciding not to eat. I would go for days, sometimes weeks without food, and my wife would even be concerned and ask when I will be starting the food, and I would really not know. So it affected a lot of things, and I would take walks most of the time trying to just be alone, and it wouldn't even help because it would be worse. I would think of a lot of things when I'm alone. And I would also associate all of that with the fact that I had a childhood which doesn't have a father figure. So I would feel that maybe if my father was around, some of the struggles he would take for me and lighten up my bed in some cases. So there was just a lot. That's how the feeling and the mood and the atmosphere was during that time.
Yeah. And during that time, is there a particular turning point or realization that helped you gain a better understanding of your depression and how to address it?
I think basically what assisted me is that during that season, the country was going through a lot of depression and mental health awareness. You would remember that it was during around the same season of WHP, Shoki, and many other people who were committing suicide, including the Rhodes student. It was a lot of people. I think one suicide, which was an eye-opener for me, was the one of Professor Mayusi, who is a born-again cardiologist, world-renowned cardiologist of UCT. That one, it got to me. It's actually something that I cannot explain because it actually confirmed what people have always said, where you say depression doesn't only happen to people who are in need, who are financially crippled, who are losing cars, who are getting repossessions and all the material losses. But someone of his caliber who had everything that you can think of, who had a dream life. And during the same period, a colleague of mine from the previous company that I worked at, he had everything, good cars, good life. He had the dream life that all of us admired. We saw him just being reserved a bit and we didn't understand what was happening. After a few days, we heard that he committed suicide. So you see, this thing happened during that time, and that made me to research more about depression on a more deeper level, because that's when I realized that depression, there's a medical side of depression. There is one that is triggered by traumatic experiences. But now from the church side, there is also another one, which is a spiritual attack where the enemy would just infuse with the discouraging spirit of depression, which will need deliverance. That's where I also learned that you would rather be safe than sorry in terms of dealing with it. Sometimes you might not know if you have the medical one, you have the traumatic one, or you have the spiritual one. I was fortunate enough to have found someone who was able to deal with all different facets of life, spiritually, traumatic, emotional, and then the other side, just to make sure everything is properly addressed.
Yeah, you're mentioning a difficult time in our history with the professor's suicide, which was really so sad. And I think for me, I am encouraged by what you are saying, that it is those two events, his suicide and your colleagues, that really made you to pay attention and say, my goodness, this thing is
Yes.
serious. Yeah. And now
Yes.
you're saying you then started this journey with your counselor and your spiritual guide.
Yes.
And that journey of recovery, I must say, it is a non-linear path. Were there
Definitely.
setbacks along the way, and how did you keep moving forward despite those setbacks?
Of course, like I say, that I was going through a multi-testing season. I would say that I was more of the biblical Job. Job had a multi-testing phase where he would be shocked by one predicament. While he's still digesting it, a servant would come telling him about another calamity. While he was still trying to make sense of what he was told as a second challenge, the third one, same like that. So that's how it happened with me as well. I had multiple things at the same time. I didn't have an opportunity to rest. And I really wanted to check out and have someone take over and just deal with my issues because I felt like I was not coping. I had my own personal struggles and issues, ministry failure, business and career failure, which is an internal issue. I also had a wife that was going through emotional instability due to the postnatal depression. I also have a small baby who was also in and out of hospital with a perpetual and incurable disease at the time. So it was just a combination of things. So of course you try to have your vigor and positivity, you try to move 3 steps forward. Then something else will come and push you 5 steps backwards. So you would always have those retaliations. But I think basically what helped me was to always have that channel of communication with my spiritual guide. And of course, I also have a childhood friend by the name of Ace. So Ace is not a counselor, he's not a professional, he's just a brother, a friend of literally over 4 decades. We grew up together, same neighborhood, is my neighbor. We got to both be born again same time, and we've been part of each other's lives from when we were small toddlers, infants, until now. So he's one of the people that God has created for me to just sort of have an offloading space, because sometimes you don't really need professional advices and all those. You just need an open door for you to have vulnerability moments without being judged. Sometimes people who are depressed do not need you to be a superstar or a Dr. Phil. They just need you to create a conducive environment for them to be vulnerable, for them to share their fears, for them to share how they feel without editing the script.
We are grateful for Ace. We are grateful for people like him who can be available in these journeys and support us when we need them, isn't it?
Definitely, definitely. We appreciate that a lot. One needs an ace in their lives.
Yes,
We all
definitely.
need the ace in our lives.
Yeah, yeah. Now, your story can inspire others who are going through the similar struggles. And I'm sure listeners are really connecting to what you're saying. I'm in goosebumps right now just listening to your story. Um, and so what message do you have for someone who is listening to you, who is going through a similar challenge or has gone through that challenge, and they feel they are either not in full recovery or they have relapsed?
Okay, I think let's first directly go to the point which says suicide is not an option. Of course, when you go through those challenges, it always look and seem like it's the only option. But then I guess the predicament of being a believer who gets to be taught about the afterlife and all the things that are there. So those things somehow make you to really not know where God stands in terms of one committing suicide. So I guess let's just first try to encourage whoever is going through stuff to say that sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. You are not alone. The Bible says you are not experiencing a challenge that is unfamiliar to men. In other words, what you are going through, someone else had gone through it before and possibly even worse, and they survived. But what I can say is that taking from the conversation that we've had and some of the points that we've raised, you do need to have someone that is going to take you through the journey. Because when you are in the depressed state, you are someone who is drowning in the sea. You need a lifesaver. Of course, Jesus on the spiritual side, he's your lifesaver. But on the literal physical side, you also need someone now who's going to be taking you through the journey. Someone who is going to be able to ease your pain, to lend an ear, to give you those skills, those coping mechanisms. If it's a seriously severe matter where you might need to even take antidepressants, go for that. And you must have an openness to say that those who are around you, they should know your state. You should not be ashamed of it. They should also know your trigger so that they will avoid doing and saying things that will push you to the direction of being triggered and to relapse. But I think now, as much as we are not talking about male depression, we're talking about depression at large. I must say, though, that there's a high observation of the male seed, which has been seen committing more of the suicide than the female gender. And that has to do with our stereotype background that I mentioned earlier, where we sometimes do not want to be vulnerable. We don't want to openly talk about our weaknesses. A man does not cry. You can't show vulnerability and all of those. I think those things, they just make things worse. They worsen the situation for us. So it ends up now becoming a double burden for us, over and above the normal pressure that depression causes generally. And I think the societal expectations do not make things any easier for us. A man is a provider. You're only a man for having material things, finances and all. So the day you lose your financial muscle, you feel less of a man. I think we as men, or even as people in general, must learn to find our identity in God and must learn to be content with who we are as the image of God, without attaching that contentment to material things which come and go. You cannot really feel like you are man enough just because you are married and you happen to have a child. What if you are in a marriage which doesn't have a child? Will you feel less of a man? You can't feel like a man just because you drive a Pajero or a Jaguar or a big car or you stay in a 5-bedroom house. You must learn to be content in who you are, so that, like Paul, you can be able to say, I know what it means to have plenty. I also know what it means to have little or nothing. But in all things, I've learned to be content. So the message that we are bringing forward is to say, if you have medical depression, seek medical help. If you are triggered and it's an issue of psychological intervention, go to a psychologist or psychiatrist. If you feel like it has a spiritual intervention or there's a spiritual link to it, go to someone who is graced in that area. So we must be able to detect the kind of attention that our depression requires. But just to wrap up and to close, I wish to say to those that are listening to us, I believe that you are also going to open that chance to say, anyone that feels like they are alone, that feels like all walls are closing down on them, there's no hope, I want them to know that we are the hope that they are looking for. Whatever that makes them to want to give up, they must use us as their reference points. And anyone who needs an ear, we might not have all the answers, but God has given us a little grace to have that empathy, to listen and to give advice and to refer where the need arises. With those words, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that someone has been encouraged at home.
Oh, definitely, definitely, Lois. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. One thing I know for sure is that your journey, your testimony is encouraging someone who is listening to your voice right now. And thank you for joining us today. This, for me, marks the beginning of our journey in talking about depression in general, but also depression as far as men are concerned. So I'm going to bring you back to
Yes.
another conversation. We definitely need to unpack and talk more on this journey. And from what you were sharing today, I could already see the angles that we are going to take going forward. So you are definitely coming back.
Definitely.
It
is
and
my
for
pleasure,
someone
Bongi. Thank you.
listening, yes.
Yes.
And go ahead, please. Go ahead.
No, I was saying I do appreciate these opportunities, because I think one of the things that are making people to think that they are alone is because when they hear something like this being shared, they will start to realize that they are not alone, and that there are other people who are sharing the same experience. So I think the more we talk about something, one thing is that once you expose something, you are making it to lose power and dominion over your life. But anything that you hide and camouflage, then it has power to destroy you. But if you talk about it, if you expose it, then its power is already nullified by default. So I'm happy that we have more of these conversations. So I guess it means that whoever is feeling like they're alone, they at least know that between you and me and others who might be listening, they know that you are not alone.
Yes, definitely. And really, for our listeners, reach out to Mentally Fit to explore other support programs to help you in your journey. You can find us on Facebook. The group is called Mentally Fit. Please do send us your comments and questions on this podcast, and we'll surely get back to you. Thank you so much.
It is a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Goodbye.
Goodbye.